All right, let's talk about the Las Vegas Raiders. Look, we all know the way the season is going. The Raiders have their eyes focused on the future. There is some talent on this team, but the biggest question is at the quarterback position. And based on some reports that came out over the past few days, and if you take a deep dive and look at some corroborating evidence, it seems like the Raiders have identified their top target. It seems like this top target is also identifying with the Raiders. Great news for Las Vegas. I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, the Raiders have battled through injuries. They've battled through poor performance, sometimes poor coaching. They are where they are right now, not in a great spot record-wise, but the eyes are focused on the future as they should be. And of course, they need to address the quarterback position. Aiden O'Connell, I understand he's beat up, but he hasn't shown quite enough to be the franchise guy. The way you need a Mahomes, a Herbert, a Bo Nix type, a young guy to compete with those people in your division. O'Connell sometimes has it, sometimes doesn't, and it looks like the Raiders could be looking at their next future guy. Obviously, they have a very high draft pick. And over the weekend, it was released Saturday, I believe, before the games. It was kind of lost in the shuffle and hustle and bustle. One top quarterback prospect, arguably the top quarterback prospect, Shadur Sanders from Colorado, was linked to the Raiders when his dad, Colorado head coach, Coach Prime, Deion Sanders himself, came out and implored Antonio Pierce to draft his son. The video was recorded in February. It was released Saturday. Interesting timing about it. But let's go into the article first, and we'll talk about it more on the other side. This is from ESPN. On Saturday, a video from February circulated on social media of Sanders, this is Deion Sanders, sharing a stage with Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce at a Las Vegas event. While praising Pierce, the Colorado Buffaloes head coach had one ask of the Raiders coach. "You are truly the best," Sanders told Pierce. "Now I just need for you to do one thing. I need you to draft those Sanders boys." The video circulation comes after Shadur posted the Raiders Allegiant Stadium on his Instagram story with the caption, "Legendary." Look, timing matters, context matters. Social media is a tool that the Sanders family, Coach Prime, use incredibly well and incredibly often. The fact that this was linked, Shadur Sanders' post, Coach Prime's involvement, this is not a coincidence. This is intentional, especially when you consider the Raiders. They're not exactly beating the brakes off of anybody. It's not like they're 11-2 going for a Super Bowl run here. I think Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, is setting the standard now, setting the stage now for forcing Shadur Sanders to be a Raider wherever the Raiders end up in the draft, which I think is obviously great for Las Vegas. I think he would be a perfect fit for them to be the franchise quarterback going forward. Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this. But first, Raider Nation in the comment section below, what are your thoughts on who you think the Raiders franchise quarterback should be? Do you think Aiden O'Connell actually is the guy? Do you think there's a guy currently playing that maybe they trade for or sign in the offseason that you think could be the guy? Or do you want them to draft a guy? Is it Sanders? Is it somebody else? Let us know in the comment section who you personally would like to see as the Raiders franchise quarterback. But Miles, I will throw it over to you now. What are your thoughts on this story and just everything with the Raiders, the future of this team at the quarterback position?
Yeah, Nick, I think, like you said, there's definitely a lot to unpack here, especially when you look at the whole situation, because it's not even 100% clear. It would be a lot easier if the Raiders had for sure the number one pick, but they're in a battle to the bottom with the New York Giants right now. I think it's neck and neck, both 2-11. So I think it's possible that the New York Giants could potentially come out ahead. You never know. I personally think the Raiders are a little bit better team than the Giants, but you never know what's going to happen there. So if they were clear cut number one, I think it would make it a little bit different, but they're not. And I think also it's kind of interesting that they're in lockstep with the Giants right now because of a prior situation involving the Giants that reminds me a lot of this current situation, but with a little bit of a twist. We go back into the annals of NFL history, probably one of the most controversial draft moments in NFL history, I would say. You know, the Chargers been a lot involved in a lot of those, Ryan Leaf, but we go back to here. It's when the Chargers draft Eli Manning. Eli Manning undoubtedly refuses to play for the Chargers, and then they get in lockstep with the Giants. They do a trade, maybe a couple draft picks swap him straight up for Philip Rivers, a couple of picks involved, and Eli Manning goes to the Giants. I think this is a really interesting situation because we're talking now about the Raiders and the Giants. So a little bit of history reinventing itself in some way. But I think there's a couple of reasons here why it's not exactly the same and why no matter what happens, it probably goes in the Raiders' favor. I think when it happened with Eli Manning, there wasn't social media back then. There wasn't such a widespread onset of, getting the word out that, hey, we don't want to play for anyone except for the team we want to play with. Deion Sanders has come out and said, hey, if someone unfavorable drafts my kids, I will get involved behind the scenes quietly. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get my kids into the best situation possible. I think that's something that to be said here. So I think with the loudness and the ability to spread the word with social media, we see something unprecedented where teams probably a little bit of like an aura around a guy like Shedeur Sanders saying, I don't know if I want to, hit that beehive. I don't want to kick the wasp nest and see what happens there because they've already threatened that something will happen. So I think that's really, really good. And also the other part is if the Raiders don't have the number 1 overall pick, there's another Colorado Buffalo that I think makes it easier for teams in Travis Hunter. I think they can easily say, hey, we actually just like this guy a whole lot better. That's why we're not going to take a quarterback. Everyone knows you always take the quarterback because that's the most important part. But there is that out because Travis Hunter is such a talented player. A team could probably snag him first overall and not feel too bad about it. So that is another thing to take into consideration why all of this happens. But nonetheless, in summation, I think with the added, word spreading of social media, Deion Sanders having the stature and, pedigree that he has and NFL precedent in the Chargers in the Giants trade, I think there's a lot going on here that's saying Shedeur Sanders is probably going to be a Las Vegas Raider.
Yeah, and I'm going to be a little conspiratorial here for a little bit. One of the interesting things that's happened this year is that obviously, as the Raiders have played poorly, there's been some, but there hasn't been an incredible amount of criticism of Antonio Pierce or really a whole lot of people involving the Raiders from the Raiders organization itself, right? From other losing teams, whether it's the Giants or the Jaguars or whatever teams that are competing for the number 1 overall pick. The Titans have really struggled this year. There's been a lot of criticism internal, right? Sometimes coaches are getting fired or threatened for being fired or whatever. But you're not seeing that from the Raiders. And I think it's because coming into the season, I'm willing to bet now a little bit, now all this is leaked out, that the Raiders were like, look, we're probably not going to be a great team. If Aiden O'Connell is awesome, if Gardner Minshew is awesome, we'll take it. But we lost out on Jane Daniels last year, right? That Jane Daniels, Antonio Pierce, great relationship. Antonio Pierce wanted Jane Daniels because the Raiders won a lot of games late in the year or won a handful of games. They've won themselves out of the draft. I wonder if they came into the season, or at least at a certain point during the season, maybe halfway through, when they realized they weren't going to be that great and Shedeur Sanders was still that great. Like, let's not tank, but let's not make sure we win enough games to throw us out of the Shedeur Sanders sweepstakes, like what happened with Jane Daniels, because we know Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, wants his kid Shedeur to play for us. I think that fell really into the Raiders' thinking. That's why I feel like we're not seeing the criticism of Pierce or the coaching staff from anyone in the organization. I think the 2024 campaign, starting in like October, has been solely focused on getting Shedeur Sanders. I think the Raiders have identified their future franchise quarterback, and now it's about biding time and make sure they're putting themselves in a situation to get him. And if they get him, I think they will. It's the perfect fit and exactly what the Raiders need to turn things around.